Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episodes on climate change. This is very important because we get a lot of call from governments, from corporation, from universities, especially they want to know more about the climate change, what will happen in the future. Especially we are representing different kind of developing nations. They have a lot of challenge after the COVID. So we need to be very much focused on that particular point, and we have expert for this climate change and this issue. We have my friends, I think already World Talent Economy Forums, our audience know about Mr. Enric. He's from Europe. Professor Donald, very famous professor. He's from USA. We have our first friend, Mr. Kevin. He always we start with him, and he has very interesting projects. And we have our new friends, Mr. Alex. So from USA. So 3% from USA, 1% from Europe, and I'm representing Asia. Hopefully it will be a very interesting session. So I want to start with my new friend, Mr. Alex. Can you please introduce yourself? Because all of the other guests, Mr. Kevin, Enric, and the Professor Donald, everybody know about them. So can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Sheriff. My name is Alex Londos. I am from Santa Cruz, California. I'm on this discussion, this forum, to help educate people about some of the activism that I've been doing. I've been doing disaster relief work, environmental work, humanitarian work, and activism for the last 2 decades. I own an international disaster relief company. I've been to approximately 17 countries in the last 7 years, doing search and rescue, body recovery, incident command system logistics, or working on humanitarian related environmental missions. I do journalism, so I've now been through 6 or 7 hurricanes. I've covered the aftermath of 5 hurricanes. I've covered approximately 40 or 50 forest fires. I went to Ghana during the Ebola outbreak. I went to Nepal after the earthquake. I went to Iraq a few years ago by myself, and I worked really closely with the Peshmerga military and volunteered in Syrian refugee camps. So I have experience in real life scenarios, trying to get food and water to people that have been suffering from climate related disasters, storms, or some of the forest fires that have been caused because of increases in global temperatures and regional droughts. I have an extensive education in renewable energy and resources, solar technology, green building construction and design, some college classes that I've taken, and I've tried my best to educate myself in climate science. I wrote a book that I released 3 years ago. It took me 8 years to finish about some of these topics, and I continue to just try to help make the world a better place by educating people in environmental science, helping encourage our transition towards global sustainability, and encouraging other people to participate in things in their community. So I'm here to hopefully answer some questions or contribute some of what I've learned around the world from working with professionals. And yeah, I'm happy to be on this forum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to start with Professor Donald. Like climate change is a very important thing right now, and all of you have experience about this climate change. So, Professor Donald, how we think about the climate change and what the real scenario, if you want.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I want to say that there are people that are real experts. But the level of the kind of thing that they need to study, I'll discuss that and I'll mention that in a minute or two. But the level of knowledge I have is a level of knowledge that pretty much everybody could and should have by reading what the scientists have to say and studying what the people who spend all their time doing this. This is not the main thing I spend all of my time on, but it's something that is incredibly important for me and for everyone else. Basically, we know that the Earth is heating up, and we know why. We know because greenhouse gases are trapping energy that would be released into space otherwise. So the sun bombards us with various kinds of radiation, lots of kinds of radiation. It heats up the Earth. That heat is released from the Earth as infrared rays, which then would go completely into space and Earth would be cold. But thanks to basically water vapor as the main greenhouse gas, it holds in enough heat that it keeps us at a temperature that we can all live at. The greenhouse gases cause it to hold in more heat than it would otherwise. And because of that, it's getting out of balance and the Earth is getting hotter and hotter. That heat is causing various changes in various changes. So some of the changes that are happening are that the Arctic caps are melting, the snow is melting, and the ice. So in the north, there's ice, but there's not much snow really because it's over ocean. But that ice, the white ice, had been reflecting some of the sunlight back into space where it came from, or back out into space. And when it melts now, the water is darker and it soaks up more of the heat. So there's more heat to be reflected, but it's also trapped. In the south, what's happening is that there's so much ice over the continent of Antarctica that ice is melting and is causing the sea level to rise, but it's also putting more fresh water in and changing the currents and the dynamics of how the water flows, and then ultimately exposing more Earth, which is darker and heating more. The fact that the poles are cold and the middle of the Earth is warm is what causes the oceans to circulate, because basically it heats up, and when it heats up it expands, and when it cools down it shrinks the water, and so the warmer water basically slides down into the colder water, and that's what causes our currents. And as the two poles get warmer and warmer and warmer, then that circulation is slowing. And all of these things are things we can see. Now we have very sophisticated radar and LiDAR and things that we can, drones we can use, all kinds of different things we can see, and we can see that the ice really is melting. We went from thermometers in people's backyards or at stations that people would even have to go out and look at, not that many generations ago, to having really sophisticated thermometers, or not thermometers, but ways of measuring the temperature all over the Earth. And there's no question that the Earth is heating up, that when that circulation of the oceans changes, then what happens is that the climate changes. As it heats up, there's more water in the air, and that water in the air comes down as snow, it comes down as rain, and because of the circulation, the same thing happens. If the winds aren't blowing as much in a certain place, then the water may not get to them, and they wind up getting drier. And so that's what's causing the areas of the Earth like California to get drier. So the heat is causing the climate change. And people often say, oh, those liars, the people that are making up this stuff about global warming, they just changed the name from global warming to climate change. But that's not the case. Both terms have been used for a long time, and it's global warming is causing the climate change. Ultimately, what's happening then is that areas where people live, where there was water, there was rain, are becoming uninhabitable. there's parts of the earth that are getting around Iran and places in the Middle East that are getting so hot now. And even in the United States, there's a whole band across the southern United States where the combination of humidity and heat are rapidly making it uninhabitable. And the consequence of that is that people aren't going to be able to live there, and they're going to have to go somewhere else. Bangladesh has huge areas that are very close to sea level, and as the sea level rises, the people that live there have to leave. In Hawaii, the water table is rising, and people are having to just look at abandoning areas of the island. All over the world, this is happening. And so the climate change itself and the worry about the forest fires and things like that are one aspect of it. But the more important aspect of it is that all these hundreds and hundreds of millions or even billions of people are going to have to move and go someplace else where they can live. And people aren't friendly about it. People don't say, oh, come and live in our place. We'll give you some of our land, you know. That's not the way people have been operating in history. And what we're looking at is massive wars, starvation. It's not something that we can just leave and not address. It's incredibly important. And so that's all I need to say about it. I think I covered everything. So
Thank you.
From 10,000 feet.
Yes. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Endrick, what do you want to add? Even you run an NGO, and how do you want to share the climate change issue with us?
Well, what we tend to forget often is that climate change is one of, I would say, about 5 major ecological crises we have today. We have the problems with our oceans being killed, and the oceanic ecosystems are about 2% of the ecosystems that we see globally. They are being hurt badly by climate change, but also by pollution from the shorelines and by overfishing, like trawling and similar, when we destroy the oceanic ecosystems that we have. Moreover, we have the soil erosion problem, which is a huge challenge, especially in the areas in the world which are mostly inhabited, like India and China, and part of Europe. We have freshwater depletion. We can do salination, but that's expensive. That's an expensive process. It requires a lot of energy. And we also have the insectocalypse, when insects, pollinating insects, are seeing their numbers collapsing, and we are not even sure why that is happening right now. So all of these crises are coming together. And then parallel to that, our financial and monetary systems have their own crises that we have seen emerge for the last 2 decades. Actually, the dot-com bubble was first, and then the Great Recession. And now the crisis is back, and we have a mountain of debt before us, and we have to somehow solve this conundrum. So the great challenge is, how should we transition the human civilization? So there are 2 main directions that we can go. The first direction is to hope that technology can solve the crisis, like we move towards non-fossil fuel-based technology, and we move towards fossil fuel mining. Sweden's government has now vowed $40 billion towards making the Kirunavaara mine, the largest industrial operation in Sweden, fossil-free. The other route is to utilize less resources. And this is a huge problem. And this, the main debate within, let's say, the broader green movement, and with green I mean everyone who recognizes that this is a huge problem, is that there are some say that it is sufficient with it is sufficient with technology, and there are those who say that is not sufficient. We need to cut down on how much resources we are using, and we need to do it more than technology can allow us to do that. The main problem is that the current economic system is built upon continuous economic growth. And as Stanley Jevons showed us already in the 19th century, if you increase the volume of economic growth, you are affecting more surface. Like if you get a new treadmill that is that is capable of producing grain more effectively, what you get is that the new areas that previously weren't suitable for grain production suddenly becomes available. The same thing with fracking. We get new diesel engines that are more efficient at burning fuel, so they burn less fuel, hybrid engines and similar. We get new techniques for taking out more energy from oil, and that allows us to utilize new areas of oil which previously weren't profitable. So that's the main challenge. And the EOS, the organization which I represent, founded by Dr. Andrew Wallace, a robotics professor, have worked together with a lot of people at European and American institutions. Our idea is that we want to have a combination of these two routes towards sustainability. The first one being implement new technology, phase out technology that is wasteful and based on non-renewable resources in relation to energy that is less wasteful and more renewable. The second step is a global ecological budget ceiling. And conservatives used to love that word, budget ceiling. They don't love global ecological budget ceiling for some reason. And that will limit the amount of resources and the amount of surface that we can use from the planet. In the same time, we need to ensure that all human beings have access to that, not necessarily equal access, but that they have access to those resources. And this means that we have to think new. So within the EOS, we have an idea of using an energy accounting system to measure our resource usage and basically ensure that we can both have fairness, innovation, and incentives in the system. Also, we want to see less of a concentration of power and of wealth that we see today. We want that local communities should be able to have a greater say in how they produce their water, their electricity, and their food. And we have to build up a greater degree of resiliency. So we are moving in that direction. Right now, we are going to purchase a bit of land in northern Sweden, and we are going to build a community there to test our ideas. A community initially meant for around a dozen people. The goal is to grow it to a couple of hundred people in the long run. And we want to test our ideas there to see where our ideas are good and where our ideas are bad and how to improve on it. So this is my opening statement, and so people know basically our background. My own background is in political science. I am basically studying how societies are thriving and how societies are collapsing. And I would say that the 21st century is very much challenging because we in humanity, our species, we have to think as a species for the first time and not think in terms of our community only, not think in terms of our nation only and of the geopolitical chessboard. We have to think as a species. So this is what I wanted to say. Pardon me for the length of my discussion or my input.
Thank you. Basically, we have many questions from audience. I think huge response from audience. They have a lot of things I will share with you, and I directly want to ask Mr. Kevin, how do you want to share your experience about this climate change? What I understand from the audience has huge interest about climate change. They want solutions. They want real guidelines. Maybe with your experience, you can guide many organizations or many different people from the different communities. So, Mr. Kevin, can you please unmute yourself? Mr. Kevin, Mr. Kevin, can you please unmute yourself? Uh, Mr. Kevin, we cannot hear you. No problem. Can you join again? And we will add you in the discussion. Okay, thank you. No, join again means Mr. Okay, Mr. Alex, as you have a lot of
Yeah.
experience for the climate change and the climate change related things, so my question is that, like, what your experience, because you visited Nepal, you visited in the different countries, and you contribute, and after different kind of crisis, you also contribute through your organizations. What your experience? Some of the peoples they believe in climate change. Some of them said no, it will not happen. Even example, before COVID, nobody believed that we have that kind of things. So
Right.
so yes, so what's your opinion? What do you think?
So I've been, when I was 21, I worked for a couple major news stations. So I was out working with the general public and working with officials. It was around the year 2000, 2001 that I really started studying climate change and learning more about it. It wasn't until I went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina that I saw the devastation. I saw how people were affected by superstorms, and I started studying cyclonic activity in hurricanes around the world and how they impact communities. I continued to educate people the best that I could, starting with my small circle of friends, and continued to reach out to people in any way possible. What I've realized is there's a lot of people, specifically in America, that didn't believe in climate change at that time. It was extremely frustrating for me to try to convince people about the basic science and try to educate them with what I knew, what I was learning, and some of the solutions to prevent catastrophic climate change. And all of the people in my community just seemed like they were distracted by, their family, their video games, sports, TV, new clothes, and everything else. So it was really difficult for me to reach out to some of those people. It wasn't until I started traveling internationally and started helping people after major superstorms, and I went to places like Nepal, I went to places like Iraq and the Philippines, that I realized that they were just like, what's going on with America? Why is America doubting climate change? Why are they doing so? Nepal is a good example. When I went there after the major earthquake, I apologize, it was maybe 2014, 2015. They were telling me about climate change and about how the monsoons have been changing, how they're dependent on the monsoons every single year to grow their crops. And they were just questioning me, like, why is America taking so long to take action? Why do so many people in America think that it's not real or they don't believe in it? And it's driven me crazy over the last decade, trying to do everything that I can to reach out to the people in my community and the country that I live in, to try to get them to believe in science, be more educated in environmental science, and then take the individual initiative to take the steps to lower their carbon footprint, reduce their environmental impact, and continue to educate others. So there is a lot of forms of activism that I've used over the years, and a lot of ways to reach people. Right now, this forum, we're reaching people. I actually have climate emergency tattooed on my arm. That's
Mhm.
reaching people. I've had hats and T-shirts that projects that. I've made
Excellent.
stickers that I've passed out by the thousands, tens of thousands of stickers that are just paper stickers that say climate change or information. I wrote a book that took me 8 years to finish. I've now given public presentations 30 times. Personal conversations with people one-on-one's another way to reach people. Through the radio is a great form. Social media is a way to reach people. I even have a stamp that I stamp on all the money that I get that says climate emergency. It's just huge, right on money. So those bills go into circulation. So there's all these different ways to help encourage our shift towards just change our mentality and our understanding of climate science. And there's a lot of different forms of activism. And I feel the people in America are so disconnected with the atmosphere, Earth's biosphere, with the ecology of Earth, that it's just set us back. And you saw this with the Paris Climate Agreement, and us pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and it's and our politicians that we have in office that's just set us back. And it's so difficult because as scientists have known that we're passing the global warming tipping point, all of these positive feedback loops are underway, like the melting glacial ice caps Donald mentioned, and like some of the ecological disasters and crises around the world that Enrique covered. It's happening now, and scientists said once we started seeing all of these things taking place around us, it would be too late to stop. So with what Enrique was covering, all of this is happening, those 5 systems, but there's a lot of subcategories in those 5 main categories. So to address that, all of these positive feedback loops, all of those main categories and subcategories, we as a species have to continue to spread our knowledge and educate other people at an exponential rate to get ahead of everything that's collapsing. And to summarize everything, it's like our biosphere is collapsing, our society's out of balance, and we have a lot of work to do in a very short amount of time. Otherwise, we've entered the sixth mass extinction, and we have a lot of work to do. And again, the people in other countries are knowledgeable of what's happening. Just America and maybe Australia, they're just slowing down global progress. I think.
Thank you, Mr. Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. And I appreciate everybody else. Sorry for my technical difficulties. I work in communities where the people are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Specifically, I'm working with a university in Chicago, Illinois, U.S., working on resilient homeownership and asset creation in redlined neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods are the most affected by climate change. And a redline neighborhood is typically an African-American neighborhood that in the 1930s was deemed unsafe to allow them to get mortgage financing. So they got worse financing for their houses. They entered a cycle of being poor with poor valuations. And if you look at the climate impact that's been having, like last summer, pretty massive heat waves, the people who died or got deeply sick from those heat waves in Chicago were in the red line neighborhoods that are mapped. Right now, as you look at the COVID infection, the hotspots are in the red line neighborhoods, and these are neighborhoods that have hard boundaries, right? It's like from A Street to 3rd Street. And if you look at the map of people who died or got sick from the heat waves, climate-related heat waves, or the COVID infection, they stop at the boundary. If you cross the street, they're not sick from COVID in the same way. They don't get so we're looking at, what to do there. And we're looking at things that can create resilient home ownership because they're also being forced out by gentrification. And the problem is particularly bad in the U.S. with African Americans. The new book, Caste, by Isabel Wilkerson, points out that it's not really a racist black and white thing. It is much more a caste. It's similar to what the Nazis had and what the Indians have that keeps black folks down. It was the need for white folks to keep them down as property for a couple hundred years that caused a lot of this problem. And so it's much deeper than race. There's a need to maintain that caste. So the wealth creation there is harder. So I'm working particularly on wealth creation in those neighborhoods. We're creating new vehicles that can get friends and family funding to entrepreneurs there who don't have a rich uncle or aunt. And that's where the way almost half the startups in the U.S. happen is from friends and family funding. These are folks who can't get on Kiva loans. And Kiva is a no interest borrowing platform, and what you need are 25 people with $25, and they don't have that. So we're creating funds that allow that to happen, and other things around resilient home ownership that help them hold on to their homes, and then that can also make their homes more safe during climate change. So I think one of the biggest risks that nobody's talked about is the political and cultural instability from wealth inequality. The people who are most affected are getting angry. And so they're going to put the system at risk because they're the ones hurt the worst by climate change. In Chicago, they're the ones that when there's a heat wave, they're the ones who die, and they're the ones that find it the hardest to get the ambulance to come or to get the help of, the city plants trees in other places. And these places become hot sinks, which is one of the reasons why people die, because municipal lack of support because of persistent racist caste system. So I'm working on creating resilience through economic empowerment, because one of the other things is that entrepreneurship is overly indicated as a path to mobility and financial resilience for marginalized communities, because one, they don't get hired typically, or they don't get paid as much, or they don't rise up. And so creating their own business is the way they can go to asset creation. And there's a 10-to-1 gap between white and black wealth that shrinks to 3 times. It shrinks by more than a quarter if they own a business. So I'm working on creating economic resilience in the places that are most impacted by climate change. And I think with all the other risks people have talked about, I think the social risk of the people impacted who aren't going to take it, who are going to come to the pleasant gated communities with good streams, all these utopia. If you're starting a utopian community, you should consider it at risk from the poor folks who are going to come and get yours, because it's not fair.
Thank you, sir. There are huge questions from audience. Actually, I want to take few questions. Professor Donald, this question for you. I will distribute everybody. I think that they will get there. Ale Ahmed, hello everyone. Can you please share the ecological concept of climate change? Thank you. Yes, Professor Donald.
Well, I was so taken with what Kevin said. I have to mention that my main writing and my main thing is sociology, and I study. It sounds kind of abstract, but the social construction of reality. And it's basically exactly what Kevin is saying, is that within communities, it's something that Alex mentioned too, within communities, how we see the world. Most of the world is imaginary. So I've never been to Malaysia. I have a good idea. I have lots of ideas about Malaysia. I learned more about Malaysia from Sharif, but I've never been there. So I'm not saying Malaysia doesn't exist, but for me personally, it's my imagination. I have to imagine it because I've never been there. And when you start and think about it, almost everything in our lives is imaginary. And so the issue of the climate becomes, people imagine what it is or what it could be. And Alex is pointing out how silly some people are in the United States. I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but there's a United States Senator, James Inhofe from Oklahoma. Oklahoma makes most of its money selling oil. There's nothing else really in Oklahoma. And to prove that global warming wasn't happening, he brought a snowball into the Senate and set it down on the table, and he said, "It's cold outside, therefore there can't be global warming." Guy's an idiot. But the point, back to the question about ecology, is what is ecology? Ecology is our trying to look at ourselves as part of a complicated system of biological, physical, and I would agree with Kevin that also psychological, sociological, and political aspects to it. It's that thing that we're intermeshed with how we eat, how our food, our air, the the oceans are becoming more acid because of the carbon dioxide in the air, and it's dissolving the reefs, and which is also causing the fish to collapse. Everything is interconnected, and that's global warming is completely changing the patterns of the interconnection. So that's how ecology fits together with it.
Mhm. Yes, there are different aspect actually our audience come. So I just want to throw these questions to our respectable panelist. So I want to take this question for Mr. Enric. Mohammad Shoail Rana, his question is that what do climate models say about the warming that could actually happen in the coming decades?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask for that because my work is in the practical field of actually finding systems that can mitigate and create a kind of balance between fairness and future. But let's say it like this: that we have the 2-degree scenario with the 2-degree warming during this century, and then we have up to the 4-degree warming during this century. And the 4-degree warming actually means up to 8 degrees warming in the polar regions, at least the northern hemisphere. So there is not an even distribution of warming on the planet. And the main issue with the Paris Climate Accord, which is built on that countries voluntarily should find ways to reduce their carbon footprint, is that we should keep ourselves within 1.5 degrees of warming, which a lot of experts now today mean is impossible. So a more realistic goal would be 2.0%, and that would still mean more disasters, more climate refugees in the future, and more crises. And we already have had some wars influenced by climate change, like, for example, the Syrian civil war, which started in 2011. And that and the entire Arab Spring basically began because the dry summer of 2010 and the wheat crisis in Russia influenced the Middle East, which was dependent on grain imports from Europe and Russia, which led to increasing bread prices. And bread prices increases is always the cause for revolutions. If you take one of the most tragic examples, Yemen has, I think that Sana'a, the capital city of Yemen, was the first major city that doesn't have any groundwater in the world. So those areas most affected will be those marginal areas. Let's say those areas that are on the verge of risks of collapse. So what I would look at would be Eastern Africa. I would look at Egypt. I would look at Pakistan, and I would look at parts of India. And I would also expect to look at parts of China, because of the big area. The big thing is the Himalayas. The Himalayas are basically a natural water tower. They're providing water for the rivers of both China and India. China is a rich country. So China is probably, and they are already doing it, moving their food production to Africa. This is driving up food production in Africa, and it's making an increased geopolitical contest between China and parts of the Western world in Africa. So we are probably going to see Chinese troops being deployed to African countries within the nearest 20 years or so. So that is my estimate. We won't see any tipping point where everything is like going down during the nearest 20 years. We will rather see things getting more and more stressed, people getting more and more indebted, and politics getting more and more volatile. I would also like to comment some of the things that Professor Donald and Mr. Kevin said, and also Alex. about this climate change denial and such areas in the Western world. And I would say that climate change denial is irrational, but in the same time, it is actually quite rational in another way of looking at it. And it is the way of looking at it like, let's say that you are a smoker. And let's say that the doctor is saying that your smoking will cause you to develop lung cancer in the long run. The question then is that the smoker can choose to say, well, it cannot be so serious. I mean, 10% risk per year for getting lung cancer, it doesn't sound that very high. Well, during 10 years, it will start approximate 100%. Most people are mathematicians, so they won't see it. And this is especially the case when we look at the history of our world and we look at how early adopters of industrialization, they, and now we're talking about the Western world, Japan, to some lesser extent Eastern Asia, started to develop high energy economies and then started importing cash crops and similar and raw materials from the developing world. So the developing world is moving upward as well. They have economic growth as well. And if everyone would basically use resources the same way as a typical Swede is using resources, we would need 4.2 Earths. So we would have to invent those stargates really soon if we are going to achieve that. People are not stupid. So when Swedes or Americans see these data, what they see is that to have a fair future for the planet, it would mean that we would have to use less resources in order to share more with the developing world. Because the developing world is reaching the so-called middle income trap, where they are becoming so too wealthy to exploit the low wages systems, and they are becoming too poor to develop high energy systems still. So they are increasingly getting stuck at a plateau. And this trend we can see unfolding in a lot of countries right now. So my take is that I both agree and I disagree with Kevin. The most dangerous people are not the poor people. The most dangerous people are the middle class, because when they see their wealth being reduced, a lot of them will say, well, we should share and we should think about others, we should be altruistic and we should try to build up something together that is sustainable. But some other of them would say there are too many people in the world. We need to reduce the amount of people in the world. Sorry for taking so much time, but
Yes, Mr. Alex, do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to expand on the question that you had from a viewer and what Enrico was saying real fast. So to explain it and summarize maybe greenhouse gases, which is a direct cause for the increase in global temperatures. Greenhouse gas is a combination of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, and other gases and pollution that enters the atmosphere. And this is what Donald was saying, how greenhouse gases affect the global temperatures and trap heat. So the Paris Climate Accord and other climate models predicted relatively precisely just this. So there's how do I explain it to the layperson? So there's all these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that is checked and calculated by parts per million in greenhouse gases. And right now, or last I checked maybe a month ago, the parts per million in the atmosphere was 417. I don't know the current, it's probably 420, 423 now. So that's how many parts per million of greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere at the testing facility that's in Hawaii. and they check it in Hawaii because there's not any other major cities that can affect that testing location. So with some of the Paris climate models, they predicted that if we are in between 400 to, like, this is just me explaining this, but with no accuracy. So they said if it's in between, like, let's say 400 to 800 parts per million, the trajectory of global temperatures would go to like 1.6 degrees. If it was in between 800 to 1200 parts per million of greenhouse gases, then the temperature would be headed more towards 2.1. If it was in between 1200 and like 1600, then it'd be going closer to 3 degrees. And then if it was more, so there's a really good chart that I would encourage people to Google search and look at that chart. So it'd see basically if we can start regulating and lowering our carbon emissions, then we can start reducing the increases and then lower it closer to something that's realistic of like 1 degree. And I would definitely recommend Google searching that image. And greenhouse gases, not only just using less of the finite resources, because we're in an economy and we're extracting resources beyond their ability to recharge, such as extracting water from wells, cutting down trees, taking fish out of the ocean, beyond Earth's ability to replenish those. So not only do we have to use less resources, like Enrique mentioned, and be cautious of that, also just everything that we do, just restructuring our society, driving less, wasting less food, wasting less energy, and maybe practicing minimalism. Everything that we do helps lower our carbon footprint and our environmental impact, and on a larger scale reduces our collective emissions that are going into the atmosphere. So the more conservative we are with all of our resources and reducing greenhouse gases, that's what's going to lower Earth's temperatures and hopefully reduce some of the catastrophic disasters we will see in the future.
Excellent. I want to take one of the point from the audience. This is very good questions. Sharmin Akhtar, climate change is a very big issue. How do we balance need of urbanizations and impact of global warming where big corporations do not behave in a sustainable manner? So who want to start first? Yes. Okay. Even Professor Donald, then I want to start with, yes, Mr. Enrique. Yeah.
Yes, and I would say that the need for urbanization is a construct of the current economy, and it puts the earth under tremendous stress, because urbanization is not only about transformation of cities, it is also about the transformation of land surface. So if you look at, for example, a city the size of Shanghai would need huge land areas to supply it, and they do it by cash crops. Cash crops are creating monocultures, and monocultures are hugely impacting the local soil the local fertility of the soil and the local water access. So the ecosystems are going to collapse. The monocultures in themselves are a collapse of ecosystems. So what I would say is cities must be built more like closed systems, and probably we would have to have a slight move back to the countryside, but also towards a more sustainable countryside, so that people should be able to live where they are, and people should be able to live good lives where they are. People should have access to healthcare, education, recreational facilities like sports stadiums and similar locally. And people should also have a local say in how the resources and systems are managed. Because one thing that people know about, for example, even climate denying Oklahomans who send snowball throwing senators to the Senate floor, they know about the needs locally of their communities, I would say. So we solve this by reasserting the local autonomy and democracy, but we also must have to do it through a global ecological budget ceiling. And this will change a lot. Also, a lot of new technologies as well. For example, modular production, that we build our habitats so they can be reused and removed. So in the future, if you want to live in a city, you live in a modular apartment. If you want to move to the countryside later when you have children, you don't need to move from your apartment. You take your apartment with you, and you put it near a lake or somewhere, and you put another habitat next to it, interconnect it, and then you have a house. And when your children are moving out, you're taking one of those two habitats and you're making a summer vacation home for people who want to travel from the cities there and similar. So that's the main challenge. Another challenge is unemployment. We are moving towards, but I will not speak too much on that, but that's another challenge, and we need to discuss that one as well.
Okay, thank
I
you.
want to say one thing about this, which is that cities have a far lower, people in a city have a lower energy footprint than people in the country. I live in the country right now, and I've lived in the city, and there's places where you can look up how much energy you use. And the place where I live is kind of a funny irony, because everybody talks about how incredibly environmentally conscious they are, but it's very spread out. Like I'm one of the only people I know that actually walks to the store, because it's a mile, and who is going to walk 20 minutes? You know, that's just more than almost anyone can even conceive of doing. So you look around, you go to the parking lot of the Safeway or wherever, and it's just nothing but giant SUVs and 4x4s and people have to have cars and drive cars a lot to get around in the country. So the country is actually a very energy inefficient. Whereas in the city, they distribute stores. You can walk outside your house, and within walking distance, there's every kind of store that you actually need. My brothers lived in New York and San Francisco, and he's never needed a car in his adult life mostly. I mean, he had one that he left in Connecticut when he lived in New York, so that he could go out to the country for a vacation or something. But you don't need it. So there's a complicated balance between these things, and it's something we need to address, partially because the cities aren't going to be able to stay where they are. As the sea levels rise, all the cities are all built on the ocean because of transportation reasons and other reasons, and we're going to have to move them. We're going to have to move New York City. I mean, think about that. That's 2% of the economy of the United States, and that's going to have to move.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't talked about is policy and government action. And one of the things we've seen with the new incoming Biden administration is that big corporates have already decided to side with them. Like General Motors has stopped their opposition to clean air standards and is saying they want to drive to electric cars. And I think, there's also an opportunity around climate change for some of the big corporates. And I think John Kerry being kind of the climate change czar is pretty interesting, because there's billions of dollars of purchasing that can become sustainable purchasing if you're looking at every department that way. And we're going to look at the incentives for industrial ag that is deeply chemically related, and they're looking at regenerative agriculture, which is restoring the health of the soil as an alternative. And there are also things around the oil depletion allowance that is a way that big oil companies they get paid for depleting the resource, and they don't pay for any of the externalities. A lot of those things are amenable by policy. And I think the Biden administration has seen that climate change is actually a winning issue, much greater across the aisle, because of the impact of forest fires and hurricanes and repeated hurricanes and hurricanes that are longer over the land because of the heating of the air so that they cause greater damage and happen more often. So I think, you know, they're big public policy levers, and there's, you know, we have reining in the fossil fuel industry, you know, in both fertilizer and in oil production are things that can really happen. I think, you know, individual actions. I mean, I carry a metal straw, right? Okay, it's a good little thing. It saves something. I'm reminded when I use my metal straw instead of a paper straw, you know, what it is. I used to use it in restaurants, if you remember restaurants where you would sit down with other people around you, as opposed to getting takeout. But there are some big levers, and I think people are ready for some of those big levers. And the car companies are showing that they're ready to do it. And I think, you know, there are other industrial levers. You know, there's the sunk cost of oil that is going to be stranded by a lot of these folks. And so there's also utilities that can be, you know, made public, like Pacific Gas and Electric, that's bankrupt, that should be a public utility. So you can do some things on the policy level, and there are some things that, you know, even in America, I think we're much more ready for that because we've been buffeted by this orange guy, but also by climate. So that's there.
Yes.
One quick point. I would say that the one actor which have done most to reduce our carbon footprint this particular year has been COVID-19.
Yes, yes. So I want to come up with this point because especially renewable energy is a very important thing as well. So Hosnara Firdaus, her question is that given that renewable sources provide only a small percentage of our energy and the nuclear power is so expensive, what can we realistically do to get off fossil fuel as soon as possible?
I
So
want
this
to
is
say
actually,
something. I want to say
yeah.
something about that right away.
Okay.
I
Okay.
had a discussion with a friend who fairly conservative. He just sneered at me saying, "Well, how much solar do you think they have in California? What's the likelihood of actually getting onto electric? You think it's even 5%?" I looked it up. It's well over 30% and growing like crazy. I mean, so it's not true that renewable isn't working, and the transition from renewable is predicted to create countless jobs. It's an absolutely it's not going to make fewer jobs. It's very possible to do. And in California, we're doing it. I mean, we're stopping. We're getting to the point where we're not going to allow fossil fuel cars in a few decades, and we're transitioning off of them. So it's 100% possible to do, and it's 100% something that's going to cause and create economic growth. So that particular fact about creating more unemployment and not being possible to do is just noise from the oil companies, because they don't want, you know, I mean, it's like you said, the local issue. I mean, in Texas and Oklahoma and North Dakota and places like that in the United States, their economy is based on oil. And so to them, it's just something that seems very bad to not use as much oil. So they come up with every excuse that they can.
Yes, Mr. Alex. Yes, definitely.
So I saw the question a few moments ago, are there going to be more jobs? And just what Donald was saying, yeah, there's going to be a lot more jobs because of the renewable energy sectors. We have new technologies, the solar industry. It just depends on where people want to direct their time and focus. Rather than getting an education in something that we're transitioning away from, if more people got educations in solar technology, that would help expedite our transition towards global sustainability and support all of those companies more. So yeah, California, we have a lot of solar. I've driven past huge solar fields in between, I think, like the LA area and Vegas. It's powering a lot of, and here with PG&E, you can select a certain option to receive your energy that's renewable, and there's a lot of incentive to install solar on your home, and that's becoming more available. And now that we have Biden in office, a lot of those processes to go through those steps and those incentives, I think, are going to increase. I want to get back. So we do have viewers watching, and I think people forget the point of voting with your money. Every single day we vote with our money, not just the straw, and not just the car that we drive, which is like every single day with where we go, how we choose to spend our money, how we choose to spend our time, all impacts the environment, and it also helps set an example with our family and friends of what we're purchasing. I know the holidays are coming up. Even a gift or something that we buy for someone is going to help set an example. So instead of buying something that's just going to sit on a shelf or break and go into a landfill, we have to buy good quality products that last, things that are durable, that have good reviews, hopefully things that are not made of plastic or chemicals and synthetic products. So voting with our money is so important. We could vote with our money and transition away from the fossil fuel industry and synthetic fertilizers and chemicals by eating organic, supporting farmers market, growing a portion of our own food. We could vote with our money when we're in the grocery store, but just with the products that we're buying on the internet, everything. So there's an environmental impact on every single product that we buy. So when we are voting with our money, it helps us support the companies that because there was a question a few moments ago, well, how do we support the major nonprofits or the companies? How do we get them to change their destructive impact on the environment? Well, voting with our money. If we all start voting with our money more, those companies are going to see the interest of the general public and how we're spending our money. They're going to start making the better products, whether it's biodegradable or things that are going to last. So I try to vote with my money every single day, and I think that's really important. That would help our shift.
Thank you, Mr. Enric.
So.
Yes, what do you want to add?
I would say that the idea to build an economy around the car as a concept is very charming. The car is greatly increasing the liberty of the individual driver, but in the same time, a car is not that resource effective. So the ideal for making a transition physically would be to put a lot of resources into railways, hyperloops, you name it, and probably try to make cars less usual. For example, through carpools and similar. If people would need that, so instead of owning a car, people would use a car when they need to use a car and then return it to the pool.
Yes, Mr. Kevin.
Unfortunately, the pandemic slowed down carpooling.
Yes,
the pandemic slowing down carpooling, but hyperloops are important.
Mr. Kevin.
Well, yeah, how you create some leverage. I mean, I'm an advisor to a really interesting project in Michoacan, Mexico, with the Purepecha people, and it's massive regenerative reforestation coupled with indigenous wealth creation, and it's pine resin forests. There's a global lack of supply of pine resin. And pine resin, you don't realize it, but it's used in about 110 industries. It's the thing that keeps the orange in the water of Gatorade. If you have leather shoes with rubber soles, it keeps that link there. If you're using a ballpoint pen, it's the thing that links it to the paper. And there's not enough of it because China went away from it to something that makes more money. And so it's something that can be really grown at scale. And pine resin plantations with reasonable refineries, you need about 1,000 acres for them, can be done anywhere in East Africa, anywhere there is degraded and public land. You can't buy the land and make it work, but if it's public land or community-owned land. So, and we've been seeing that massive regenerative reforestation with intercropping, and they found several things that intercrop with it, medicinal bushes of various kinds, is one of the best ways to do the sequestration of carbon at rapid scale. I think we need to do rapid scale regenerative reforestation, and pine works. Local pine works in most of East Africa. That's where it's degraded but not eroded, and it's public and community owned. That's already been expanding in Central America and in Nicaragua with the mosquito people, and we're looking at other kinds of places that can happen. And you can also, we've also got away with that thing. There's about 1 billion people in the world who can't take investment on their lands because the land is owned publicly. And so you can't transfer title in a way that investors like. But we've solved that with a thing called usufructuarian rights, which just means you have the right to the fruit of the tree, but you're not taking it away from the indigenous people. So those two things are ways that, there has to be wealth creation beyond, green recycling jobs or green electrification jobs or solar power jobs. You can have to have wealth creation in the developing world where there are massive places that can be reforestation and regenerative forestry. So you don't chop down the trees. These trees can produce for 80 years. And it's something that's really needed. And as you bring it back, pine resin is globally competitive against hydrocarbon adhesives, but they have to match the supply because the world's biggest supplier turned away from it, and the way that China turns away from it, it just stops everything. So I mean, those are some things that can happen. I think there has to be indigenous wealth creation, and investment on indigenous land, and reforestation on that land. Those are, I think, some things that we can support in lots of ways. Not being there, but giving to those, investing in those. They get loans on Kiva and other kinds of ways. So that's something.
Thank you for that information. That was new.
Yeah, EgidoVerde.com. EGIDO Verde. They're pretty amazing how they're really doing it at scale.
Yes, thank you, Professor Donalds. What type of strategy we should take for overcome from this challenging situation? Still, we are in trouble. So I want to ask these questions to everyone. Even I want to start with Professor Donald.
I'm very much supportive of what Kevin is saying, because I'm co-founder of an incubator in Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley, we think of it as a place of technology, but really what Silicon Valley is good at creating is companies. So Silicon Valley is the crucible of entrepreneurship. And we have all of the ability, we have the funding, we have the lawyers to incorporate, we have the technical people to do the work, and it's very difficult to compete with it because we've done it for so long. There's trillions of dollars of infrastructure, more infrastructure in Silicon Valley than the entire economy of, say, Finland. And I also want to say that Oulu, Finland, where I live in Finland and where I got my graduate degrees, made itself. What it did for Oulu to become a city was pine tar. That's what they did. They grew pine tar. They were one of the major sources of pine tar in the world. So it is a good way of wealth creation. We have a political issue. And I'll tell a very, very quick story. There was a book called When Prophecies Fail by a guy named Festinger. He was a psychologist, and he studied this cult that believed that aliens were going to come and wipe out Earth and take all of the people that were devoted to them up to some other planet where everything would be perfect. They had a specific day that it was going to happen. It didn't happen. And you would expect that after it didn't happen, they'd think, well, I guess we were mistaken. That's not what happened. They became more devoted to the idea of these aliens that could possibly destroy Earth, went around proselytizing and trying to get more people into their cult, because they reasoned that because they liked the aliens and did what the aliens said, that they'd saved the Earth. And that was their reasoning, and that's where the book where the term cognitive dissonance comes from. And we are faced with exactly what several people have said. We're faced with the thing that people are going to come up with excuses. Enrique mentioned about smoking. We're going to come up with excuses, and I wish I had an answer to that. I mean, I think that Kevin's strategy is probably the only one that can work is a bottoms up strategy where we make it so that people can create their own wealth and they're not stuck in the social structure. I mean, I'm going to say this really quick, which is that what Kevin was saying is like we live in social structure that gives meaning to things. Like we go to work, we know that we're supposed to walk into this building, sit down at a desk, do these various kinds of things. How do we know stuff like that? I mean, there's this very, very complicated thing that we're doing unconsciously that allows us to work together. And part of the problem in the United States right now is that there's an older white group that's freaking out because the United States is becoming more and more diverse. And they're seeing their power erode. And because of that, they're doing things like electing Trump to protect themselves. And that exact situation, there's a saying in science, which is that science proceeds funeral by funeral. People don't ever change, just the older people die off and the younger people take over. And if we can, as Kevin says, if we can empower people to have their own way of creating wealth, and we aim at creating wealth in ways that are more environmentally sustainable, then it's possible that we can start shifting society in ways that will become more sustainable. Otherwise, I mean, people are just going to work as hard as they can to keep things the same. If you're somebody who's in power and you're the top dog, you don't want to change that. So that it's kind of a bad situation when we look at it that.
Yes, my friend Alex, what do you want to add about the strategy?
This strategy for changing. Could you please repeat the question?
No,
I was
basically
listening
my
to what
question
Donald
is
was
that,
saying.
yes. Basically, my question is that how a nation, those who have impact on global warming, those who are already in trouble, what type of strategy they can take for overcome from this situation?
Wow, that's tough because there's so many countries that have that will be a threat and they have borders. One of the panelists was mentioning, I think it was it Donald, about New York, or was it Enrique, about how we're going to have to relocate New York. That's okay. So in that situation, or situations where people are trying to evade or move away from let's say a hurricane prone region, like in the United States. The United States is so big, they could relocate to a different location in the United States. Unfortunately, people in the Middle East that are experiencing regional heat waves, and that will continue because it's so close to the equator and because it's a location on Earth, it's just going to cause so many disruptions. So there's a lot of limitations with borders and with what passports you have that allows you into other countries. Some countries around the world are going to go through extreme hardship, uncomfort, and just struggling. It hurts me because I've seen the suffering in these different countries. I've been to a lot of third world countries. I know the politics and the limitations of those countries. I feel bad that I'm so fortunate to live here in the United States, and that we have disasters, but it is larger. So we have, if someone chooses to, they can go to different locations. So that leaves it up to the individual countries to try to become more resilient, as resilient as possible. So if they're experiencing storm surge from hurricanes, then they got to start implementing storm surge walls. If they're going to experience drought, then they got to start implementing some sort of food security. If they're going to experience regional flooding, they have to start implementing strategies to address those regional strategies. But they have to acknowledge climate change as a threat. It's not just an existential threat anymore. It's happening right now. So they got to start implementing strategies right now that are going to help protect them. And they got to start looking at the different ways that they have to prepare. And I think there's individual preparation, which I strongly encourage people to build a bug out bag that's taking all the essentials that you need to make sure that you're prepared. So if there is an earthquake, if there's a short notice on a superstorm, if there's a flood, you have your sleeping bag, warm clothes, some food, your birth certificate, maybe a little bit of money, a first aid kit, some medications that you might need, maybe an extra pair of glasses, some warm socks. You might have a tarp, a knife for security, maybe some matches. You put all these things in one bag so you have it ready to go if there is an emergency or a disaster. So there's that. Also, just making sure that you have, your life in order. And I notice a lot of people just they live outside of their means in America. They buy a lot of things, they own a lot of things, they have their life scattered in 1,000 different directions. And as we continue to see more disasters around the world, we're going to continue to see more migrations of people. So I think tiny homes are a good solution, mobile tiny homes. And then I actually wrote about this in my book that I started writing in 2008, and I released my book 3 or 4 years ago. I talked about how everyone in, Iraq and Afghanistan and the Middle East, I was trying to encourage them to, start constructing tiny homes, because eventually the global heat waves are going to be so severe that they're going to have to relocate. And tiny homes allow people to move throughout the region. So there's different ways to prepare from a government level and an individual level, and all of that takes um, you know, education, personal incentive, individual incentive, and just knowing that this is something that we're all going to face. So
Mhm.
again,
Excellent.
borders are limiting. And
Mhm. Mhm. Yes,
thank
thank you.
you.
Mr. Enric, what do you want to add for if we have to go for a plan, a national strategy for climate change?
That varies depending on what country you are living in and of the challenges that your country is working on. But in general, what we have to do is to see that we have perverse incentives where people are rewarded for doing things that are affecting other people down the line. So the most important step that we have to do in order to facilitate a green transition is that everything must cost its environmental impact. So everything must be priced after the kind of impact that product and that service has down the line. There is no other option. So that's the uh, big idea. Also, that we need to shorten our transport networks, and we need to uh, produce stuff more environmentally friendly and similar. We need to, when it is rational to do so, ecologically rational to do so, move towards producing stuff locally. For example, here in northern Sweden, making more of our buildings out of wood. That is an example. In other areas, there could be other solutions.
Yes.
So, a short answer, just.
Yes, yes. Thank you. This is actually very good discussions. Actually, World Talent Economy Forums, we have our organization, Asia Research and Development Institute, Al Noor Academy. We're working together. So we have a plan to arrange more policy level discussions. We want to work together. We want to create different kind of field level initiatives. So all of you are actually expert. Your guidelines, your suggestion. We have many expert from around the world. Uh, uh, any of your guidelines actually help us to solve the problem. And beside that, I uh, just request that what is your concluding remarks for today's sessions? What do you want to share with us? I want to start with Mr. Alex, then Mr. Enric, then Professor Donalds. Yes.
So after studying climate change, disaster relief, humanitarian issues around the world, I continue to get more and more concerned that we're out of time. We have to take action. President Trump was in office, he slowed us down. He slowed down global progress, not just pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. There's a lot of other steps that he interfered with our progress. We have a lot of work to do in a very short amount of time. It takes not only just becoming educated, spending our individual time doing some research on our own, watching YouTube videos, watching environmental documentaries, talking to our family and friends about these issues, voting with our money, voting correctly politically, and just helping our global transition towards sustainability. At the same time, we have more concerns, more disasters, more threats. So we have to also prepare for that to help keep our family and friends safe. All of this has to do and comes down to time management, how we choose to spend our time, how we choose to spend our day, what we choose to put our focus into. And we need a global shift away from slightly away from religion, from sports, from TV shows, from hobbies, from things that we want to do. Now we have work to do. We have a lot of work that we have to do. So because we have too much at risk. A lot of people are going to suffer and die, and we have the responsibility to the future generations of the world to do the right thing. So, thank you.
Mhm. Thank you, sir. Mr. Enrique, yeah.
I know that there is a bit of a contention in this panel, and that's because of the conflict I lined up in the beginning, the idea of technology contra a global ecological budget ceiling and how they interact and how we must do. I would like to explore a little bit on the former thing I said, and this is about urbanization. So it's true that people in city don't need cars, so they are using less resources individually. In the same time, what we see is, for example, in Norway, the cod industry, cod is a type of fish. They are trapping the cod in Norway, packing the cod, and transporting the cod to Japan, where they are freezing it and putting it in the packages, and they are going back to Norway to label it. And I think that type of incentives might be the most economically rational if you ignore the carbon footprint part. So we have to look about that and try to align our economy so what is ecologically rational will be economically rational as well. So that's my closing remark.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Like I understand you are outside. If you feel bad, you can go inside. No problem. It's really trouble. Like one and a half an hour. Yes.
It's a
Yes, you can.
little cold. No, it's not the time. It's just
Okay.
it just
Okay.
changed the way that you think when you're like. But no, I've
Okay.
really enjoyed this. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Kevin. Yes. What's your contribution?
Yeah. I think when I think about climate change, I think about what Eleanor Ostrom said when she said, the solution to a global problem is not a global solution. It's a polycentric solution. Everywhere is the center. What can you do? What can you connect to? Another thing I would add is I think the new book, Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, is really effective near future hard science fiction. And it's kind of looking at imagining what it's like in a few years when the Paris Climate Accord is adopted, but then people have to break it because of a giant heat wave in India, actually, that is killing people. But it lets you imagine the situation locally and globally. And then I would just, in Chicago, one of the things we're looking at is, there is no friends of the urban forest in the Chicago red line neighborhoods, and planting trees makes a lot of difference. It makes your house less hot in the summer. It shades you in the winter. So there's a lot of local actions that can be taken, and they can take them for their own benefit. And I think we're looking at coordinated collective neighborhood level action but within financial platforms like our Friends and Family Fund that can be replicated a lot of different places.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Before I go for the concluding remarks for Professor Donalds, World Talent Economy Forums, we are developing our scientific committee. So I request all of our panelists, if you are interested, because your experience your knowledge, your guideline will be very important for us. We are very much action oriented. We are not only discussing on this kind of policy level discussion. Beside that, we are taking different, arranging different kind of debate, summit, conference, different kind of training and development. Beside that, like any kind of interesting things that you want to implement with us, you can guide us, and we want you in our scientific committee. So if you have your information, you can share with us. By this way, hopefully we can create a very professional team, because today we are very happy for the climate change is a very important, and you people join, then you encourage us, and you can see how people actually motivated. They have a lot of questions, they get this answer that, and I am sure there are thousands of students and the youth community, they will get guide from your discussions. They will even the government and policymaker, they can take different kind of strategy. So this is really really nice discussion, and we want to take more initiative, more activities. Your support and guideline is very important for World Talent Economy Forum. So I directly want to go to Professor Dr. Donald for the concluding remarks for today's session.
Thank you. I must say you're doing a very valuable thing here at the World Economic Forum, and I've enjoyed working with you and talking to you, and I'm looking forward to the different topics that you're going to be able to share and have experts. You know, I learn from them too. I really agree with both Kevin and Enrique about the economic part of it, because when what I was saying about cognitive dissonance, people's just inability to see things or find excuses that what's happening isn't real, that's not something we're going to be able to change. But one example that goes with what Kevin says is the idea of a carbon tax. And the idea would be that you tax carbon. There's no place where we're using carbon for our society that it's basically a good thing. I mean, we use it for plastics, we use it for fertilizer, we use it for fuel, and in every case, it's screwing up the environment and the world. But what we're doing instead is we're subsidizing it. We're actually paying people to do this, and this is not, it's not going to work, because if we start charging the carbon tax and we start making carbon very, very expensive, which basically means petroleum products, people won't use it as much. They'd be happy to drive an electric car if it costs a fraction as much as a petroleum-based car. And those are the kinds of things we can do. And interestingly enough, those have to be at the top. That's not something an individual can do. It's something that we're going to have to do on a national and national levels. So in the United States, I mean, every country is different the way that works, but I encourage people, especially in the United States, to remember that their vote does count, and get out there and try and start getting people who are going to start making the changes at the national level that we need to make, because it's too big. You're not going to change people's mind by giving them facts. It's just not going to work. And I want to say one other thing. We've passed the point of no return, as Alex says, and our minds have to switch to mitigation. Like, since we know these things are going to happen, a perfect example of it is Bangladesh. I mean, Bangladesh, as the sea levels rise, there are hundreds of millions of people that are going to have to leave and go somewhere. And in India, how happy are they going to be to have 100 million people come and just move in? I mean, they're not, and that's going to be a bad war, and it's not going to be a good thing. But somehow we have to start thinking, well, this is going to happen. It's like Enrique said, an example is the Syrian civil war. That was a climate-driven war, and that was horrible. And so we're just going to continue to see these things, and we need to start electing leaders who are going to be able to acknowledge this and start mitigating these circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your nice discussion. And I want to especially give special thanks to our audience, those who always joins and come up with some interesting questions. So hopefully in the we have a plan. I try to making a plans with our professors and our intellectual peoples. Like if you allow me, I want to invite you more and we want to do a more effective discussion. I'm sure this kind of policy level discussion is very, very important. Even what the professor said about example, Bangladesh, even in Indonesia, Maldives, Nepal's, many countries, they have this kind of problem. So hopefully we can give them some specific strategy and guideline. And I want to give the special thanks to our audience, those who come up with the question. I'm sure you get the best answer from our guest. Thank you for your valuable time and everything. It's a really, really nice session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Take care.
Have a nice day.
Bye bye.
Everyone.
Take care.
Yeah, take care. It was very fun.